Hi, and welcome to this Power Chat hosted by Eurelectric. We're here in the studio in Brussels to discuss biodiversity today. Don't hesitate to join the discussion below, put in a comment or a question, and we'll try to answer it as we go along. I'm here today with you, Noor Yafai, the European Director for the Nature Conservancy. Can you start by telling us what is the Nature Conservancy?
Thanks, Kristian. It's lovely to be here today. The Nature Conservancy, we're a global conservation organisation, one of the biggest in the world, with a mission to protect the lands and water upon which all life depends. We're active in over 70 countries around the world, so in Africa, Latin America, Asia Pacific, the Caribbean, and also here in Europe. In Europe, we have 3 main offices here in Brussels today, where we're sitting, in London as well as Berlin. We recently opened an office in Croatia and also in Switzerland.
This sounds like enormous. How many people are working at TNC?
So it's over 4,000. Around 1 in 10 of us is a scientist. I think we've got teams of scientists, ecologists, conservationists, policy professionals. So we're really diverse. And here in the Europe team, we have more nationalities than people. So we're really diverse and very European.
Right. So protecting nature, avoiding collapse of ecosystems, maintaining biodiversity on our green planet. How's that going?
Well, there's certainly bright spots, right? And we've seen, a lot of progress in the last decades. We have the Paris Agreement. It's all about implementing that. It's all about financing that. We need to make sure that around the world we're making huge progress to financing the national climate plans, and obviously renewable energies is part of that. I think one of the bright spots that we saw in the climate space was the agreement to triple renewable energies globally. And we were delighted as the Nature Conservancy to be a part of that campaign by your friends at the Global Renewables Alliance last year to really, bring that to bear. The challenge is we need to make sure we do that at the same time by pursuing our biodiversity goals. Over 196 countries around the world have committed to the new global biodiversity framework. So that's another bright spot that came out of COP15 in Montreal. We need to make progress towards those goals. And Europe is, as at least has been up until now, is a leader, both in terms of the policies, but also in terms of the financing as well. So Europe really does play a vitally important role in financing climate action, nature action, and I think there's a lot of leadership also in terms of how you do that in harmony with people and communities. So there's a real urgency, Kristian. No one should take any of this for granted. We have the policy frameworks in place largely to be able to meet those goals. But really now what we need to do is mobilise every part of society. We need a whole society approach. And that means businesses, that means civil society, it means governments, it means communities, it means private philanthropy, it means unlocking the markets and the power of the markets to fund the transition and beyond.
When you open the newspaper these days, it feels like the world is on fire and there's not much of a hope for anything.
It's true, and there are sobering moments. We see that. We see just what happened with the elections here in Europe really causing moment for pause. We need to reflect on what people, ordinary citizens and voters understand to be the urgency of the climate crisis, of the biodiversity crisis, and what that means for them. So I do think there's a big job that all of us have to do to connect better with ordinary folks, with communities, and make sure that all of society is heading in the same direction. So, I like to call us bridge builders at the Nature Conservancy. It's really important that we step out of our own comfort zones and that we reach over to other sectors, to other parts of society, and attempt to try and find common ground. Because the reality is, it's very rare that you find any topic everybody agrees. But I do believe that there are a lot of shared goals ultimately. It's about finding a way to getting there. So, to your question, I think we do like to be optimistic. Optimism, I think, carries you quite a long way, but it only carries you so far we also need to be realistic about the need to compromise sometimes and find those bridge building solutions.
Right. Let's get back to that twin challenge of delivering on climate action, which implies a massive build-out on renewables on the one hand, and preserving biodiversity, making sure that that build-out happens in a safe and responsible manner when it comes to preserving our natural surroundings. Because that exact interface is the one that we have been working together on, in fact, in the so-called power plant project. What we saw a few years ago was that with the Paris Agreement goals on mitigation, on reducing emissions, building out renewables, we needed to speed up a lot as a power sector. At the same time, we were seeing that speeding up was essentially beyond our control because one of the main bottlenecks was actually the political permitting, the authorization of projects. So in a nutshell, that's what we've been trying to explore. How do we deliver on both things at the same time? How do we identify synergies and make sure that communities around us feel involved and can accept these new projects? We launched a guidebook with concrete principles, and tell me maybe just a little bit, why would a civil society organization care to join such an initiative?
So Kristian, you might remember you and I, over 2 years ago, had this joint vision to get our sectors working together on this. I think we recognised the need to actually join forces. And I was delighted that we actually launched as the Nature Conservancy and Eurelectric at the Climate COP in Egypt, a joint mission to try to do what we can to find a way of accelerating renewable energy at the same time as protecting biodiversity. And that was a very inspiring first report, power plant, which is why I'm delighted we've been able to jointly launch the Power Plant 2, which is the next important milestone in that journey. This guidebook, is a great model, a first of a kind model for how we can really truly integrate biodiversity into projects that accelerate the deployment of renewable energy. And that's what we need to do. We can't have one without the other. Climate change and biodiversity really are two sides of the same coin. And so with that in mind, I think this guidebook has a lot of potential to be a tool that can be used not just here in Europe, but also internationally. The 12 principles that are set out in this guidebook are very new. I'm not aware of them existing anywhere else, certainly not jointly supported by civil society and industry in the way that today's guidebook has. And I truly believe that, in the interest of both our climate goals, our nature goals, but also for competitiveness, this great example of European leadership by the industry as well is something that we should take global. And I think there's real scope to say, let's now take these 12 principles and see what we can do to turn them into an internationally recognised set of principles that will help guide, tripling of renewable energies globally in ways that work in harmony with both nature and people.
So 12 principles, that's a lot for any report or any conversation these days. If you were to sort of wrap those 12 principles in a very short pitch, what is it all about? Ensuring biodiversity in relation to renewable projects? What's the most important things to be aware of?
So I won't reel off all of the 12, but some of them are, they're all rooted in good science and data. I think that's the first thing to say. And I've really been impressed by the very thoughtful and careful approach that's been taken by the team and WSP as well, who've authored the report, in terms of really trying to go out there and consult scientists and a wide range of organisations to build the thinking behind the principles. And we need that evidence-based approach to policy, of course. I think the focus on ensuring the mitigation hierarchy is clear, and that should become a table stake. That should become an absolute norm across the industry. I'm sure you would agree. But then, there are some of those principles as well that are there about ensuring we measure additional biodiversity contributions. Transparency, that's another really important principle, and that goes also hand in hand with the principle of equity and inclusion, which I believe also brings in the community engagement piece as well, and that's really necessary.
Let me pause you on the mitigation hierarchy, because people just joining this conversation might not know about that. Could you explain that in very simple terms? What is that about? So
very simply, the idea is, first and foremost, if you think about it as a triangle of needs, what is the baseline? You need to make sure that you are avoiding negative biodiversity impacts. That's the first priority for a project developer. That needs to be the first step. And then building on that, you need to be looking at restoring opportunities and scope for restoring the nature impacts, restoring nature. Right at the very top, one of the end goals could be to deliver biodiversity net gain. And that's what we're seeing many of your members actually doing. So some real leadership going on in industry and projects, some of which are highlighted in a few of the case studies in the report, that are really going out there and trying to go beyond that base layer of needs and actually deliver net gain, and that positive net gain for biodiversity. And I think that's where we really need to go. That should be the North Star.
You're mentioning that this work that's going on in Europe in some ways can, let's say, serve as an example for other parts of the world. Do you see the same kind of awareness in other parts of the world?
Do you mean awareness in terms of the need to think about nature and biodiversity?
Integration of biodiversity and nature protection in energy projects.
Yeah. So, the good news is yes. There's some really good examples. At the Nature Conservancy, our own site renewables right scientific approach was actually pioneered in North America. And we saw a lot of good practice there in terms of the way that onshore wind energy was rolled out, and also informing at the time federal level guidelines on this. So I think, the industry, as well as, by the way, renewable buyers. We have the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance in the US, where you see the customers, the end customers, really switched on and attuned to what they want to see coming out of the supply chain, and wanting to make sure there's clear signals that they expect nature and consideration of nature to be very much a part of the thinking about project development right from the very beginning. We're also, as the Nature Conservancy, working in India, and we have a new project, for example, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, where we're working with local actors to help them roll out renewable energy deployment in a way that protects both nature but also works for people. So I'm really encouraged actually by what I see as a lot of interest in India, for example. Here in Europe, there's a lot of interest and it's growing. Our conservation team in the southeast of Europe has been working with Croatia, with the countries who are involved in the energy community, to try to scale up best practice across the 9 countries that are part of the energy community. So the good news is there's no shortage, I think, of examples, but we do need to make sure it's truly global. So there's a lot of work still needs to be done to make sure that this is well understood at the top levels, that we try to actually drive policy coherence between what we see coming out of the climate UNFCCC process as well as the Convention on Biological Diversity. I think there's lots of scope to knit together some key actions that can drive more of that coherence. And that's where, collaborations like ours come in.
You're mentioning the policy dimension, because we see from this report that on the one hand, there is a clear acknowledgement of industry that more needs to happen. There are also coming reporting requirements our way. On the other hand, we also see that this very clearly comes with a cost. And it's no wonder because ecosystem services have a high economic value, so it's in a way natural that they also come with a cost. How do you see us address that markup, if you will? You have on the one hand the example from the US where it's demand driven, companies asking for this, but how could we spur this also with policy measures?
That's really such an important question. It's very timely, Kristian. I mean, first I want to say, I mean, there are examples, and I think your colleagues have shown us examples where actually it's even cheaper, ultimately, in terms of the net cost of the project, to be thinking about this at the beginning. So I do think if you want a project to go on time and on budget, in most sectors, you really need to be thinking about non-technical risks right from the very beginning and thinking, how do you manage as a business developer, as an investor, those non-technical risks right from the beginning? So I think that there is a core business case underlying for getting that right, and making sure that we speed up permitting timelines, for example, by ensuring that there's a really credible approach all the way through to planning a development that the community can also have confidence in. That said, we recognise that especially some of the best practice examples, companies are going above and beyond. So I think we need now policies that really recognise and reward those best practices. Now, how do we unlock more private financing for nature? Well, I think one part of that is to make sure we have policies that recognise and reward best practices. A good example of that is the practice of incorporating non-price factors into auctioning schemes. Now, if we look at that in Europe today, yes, we see a few member states who have taken the very good step of including biodiversity in some of those non-price factors and making that a source of competitive advantage at the tendering stage. Our back of the envelope analysis shows that even just across 4 or 5 member states, they're all very different. There's no real attempt as yet to harmonise what those biodiversity non-price factors should be. And I think there's an opportunity there. We knew that businesses need clarity, simplification, clear market signals. Why not actually embark on an EU-wide effort to create a much more harmonised approach to non-price factors? Doesn't mean that we should slow down the process. Actually, I think it's the opposite. It's about simplifying it. It's about making sure it's credibly informed by science, and that it works for companies as well as for member states. So that's, I think, a good example of how we can do that.
Let's now assume that this gradually becomes best practice in the sector and that policymakers get the signals right by and large. If we then zoom out and say, the power sector will eventually get their game right, maybe help industry decarbonize, what do you see then in the bigger scheme of things as the next level challenges for, let's say, getting this twin challenge of climate change and biodiversity protection right?
It's also a really good question. And it's timely also, Kristian, because we've just seen with the European elections that a big voice coming from farming and from landowning sectors. And I think, in order to really go forward well, we need to recognise that land is a common factor and that we have multiple users of land. And I believe that now we're seeing more of this consensus in terms of what power and nature can do together in terms of those twin challenges. The third piece here is surely land and food security. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in thinking about what are those sweet spots in the middle, what are those policies that can really actually drive the right outcomes and the best outcomes between the power sector, in terms of reducing emissions, biodiversity and restoring what we see as an enormous amount of degraded land, and at the same time benefiting landowners and farmers who are looking for new ways to be equitably playing a role in the transition. So I would love to take the conversation that we've had between the power sector and nature to add, at least a third element to that, and to bring in the voices of farmers and landowners and say, how can we all work together, recognising that there is this nature, climate, food, water nexus. And if we think about the Green Deal in Europe and what will come beyond the Green Deal, I really believe that the science is telling us we need to tackle that. Businesses are telling us we need to tackle that. And it's imperative that we do. It's only going to be a matter of time before the cost of taking action really begins to spiral. So there's a strong imperative to start thinking about and acting on that now.
So what does a sustainable, thriving farming business look like in the year 2040? Can you give us a few snapshots of that?
Ooh, well, I mean, that is the question I think that so many of us are thinking about and talking about now. Well, I think it's one where we reach climate neutrality. As you know, that's a key goal now enshrined into European legislation. We need to bring farmers into that. How do we get to climate neutral farming? The second is we need to think about water, and we need to think about sustainable water use. We also need to think about how we harness the power of regenerative agriculture and what that means in terms of really transitioning towards more sustainable farming. And there, I think there's a major opportunity within the European policy architecture to find ways to unlock financing for regenerative agriculture. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit towards that. And we need to think about the role of public money, Kristian. You know, we need to make sure that the money that is invested, taxpayers' money on subsidies, really is channeled to meet the goals that society has deemed important. And here we know that climate change, nature, food security, these are all inextricably linked goals. And the farming sector has a vitally important role to play in getting there. So let's find the sweet spot between these policies where we can really drive action that benefits climate, nature, and people.
Right. So one of the things that we've done as a follow-up to this report now is to put an award in place that basically screens best practice projects across technologies, across regions in Europe, to see what are the best renewable energy projects that combine climate mitigation with preservation of nature and ideally even net gains for biodiversity. So a next step will for sure be to hand out that award next year, and in the meantime maybe we'll have time to think about a next report on the topic of water, energy, food, and a sustainable future for our agricultural sector here in Europe. Thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to the future work.
Thank you.
Thanks.